Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our special wine tasting event for our special clients at Presilium Private Wealth. You are very important to us, and we love hosting these events for you. Our life's work is to ensure that all of you reach your financial goals and have an amazing experience along the way. Every decision we make is made with your success in mind and drives us each and every day. Thank you. As usual, we remain ready to take advantage of whatever the world and the market gives us next. I want to thank Kelly Casper, our Vice President of Client Experience, for the amazing job she does in organizing our client events. She puts in a tremendous amount of time making them so special. I also would like to thank my entire team at Presilium. Every one of them is exceptional, extremely dedicated, and care deeply about you, our wonderful clients. Now, I don't want to stand in the way any longer of two amazing bottles of wine and the perfect cheeses to pair them with. Brandon, our resident sommelier, is going to guide us through the wines, while our new friend, Will, shares his extensive knowledge of cheese with us. Brandon and Will, we have an amazing group of friends with us here tonight. Thank you for joining us.
The idea is the first 30 minutes is going to be wine. The next 30 following that is going to be cheese. So I kind of want to put this into two different categories, mainly so as to not inundate you with too much information at once. But know that when cheeses, especially great cheese, is paired with great wine, this is an experience that, well, it's not always done perfectly. You can't just randomly pick cheese and randomly pick wine and hope it's going to go well. That rarely works. Occasionally it does. It rarely works so. But when it does go well, it is one of the best gastronomic experiences I've ever had. And hopefully we're going to pass that on to you as well. Before we get there, though, cheers to all of you as my glass melts into the background. This is Tuscany behind me, which we'll talk about. But cheers to you. We are starting with a white wine from France, and specifically from the Loire Valley. If you are new to this, then you're going to see a few different maps. You're going to see images. You're going to see everything I can possibly do to immerse you in these places. But along the way, feel free to use the chat and we'll keep an eye on it. So the chat's going to be your way of communicating with me and later Will. So ask questions there. You are very much at will to communicate with us however you wish, but the more questions, the better. And every question is important. Wine can be intimidating. It can be difficult. It can be all these different things. So my goal is to kind of bring that down a notch and hopefully give you the language so you can go out into the world and purchase wine on your own in a way that you feel comfortable with. All right, so we're gonna start with France. And so I'm gonna bring up a picture of France. France is often one of the more confusing areas, I guess wine regions as a whole, that exist in the world simply because there is so much minutia involved. When I say minutia, what I mean is that there are specifics that you sort of need to know when walking into the French wine game, the French wine world. So if you actually just take a look at your white wine bottle, you're going to see that this big word, Champellieu, that's the producer, but you're going to see the word right underneath that, Vouvray, that's where it comes from. And we are expected as consumers to know what Vouvray is, because there's nothing else on this bottle that's going to help us. We can probably guess that it's from France. We might even be able to guess if we've seen Vouvray before, that it might be from the Loire, but other than that, we have no idea what grape it is. And so there's a lot of things that we need to bring to the table. Know, though, for yourself, that Vouvray is always going to be Chenin Blanc, and Vouvray is always going to be from the Loire Valley. And so on this map, the Loire Valley covers actually a pretty decent portion of it. It's all of this green area that's almost center from the ocean to the center of France. So all of this green area, and it follows the Loire River. Many of you likely know Sancerre. So right on this kind of end, this eastern portion that almost abuts Burgundy, that's where you're going to find Sancerre. So that's where you're going to find some of the most impressive expressions of Sauvignon Blanc that exist in the world. Sancerre, note that it is also very near Chablis. And so if you like Sancerre, you probably like Chablis, even though, and this is sort of a paradox, the grapes are different in each region. But we are going to be more in the central part of the Loire Valley tonight in a place called Vouvray. Vouvray is known for probably the oldest, at least maybe also most prestigious place on earth for Chenin Blanc. It is that for several reasons, but one of those reasons is that the natural climate, the natural environment is such that Chenin Blanc tends to do very well here. And so when you smell this wine and when you taste it, know that Chenin Blanc is going to be a pretty ripe, juicy, and exuberant wine or grape as well. Whenever you have Chenin Blanc, it's one of my favorites because it does kind of plays both worlds. It has this tropicality, it has this kind of brightness and juiciness, but it also has this kind of mineral force at the end with a little bit of salt. So it has both of these spectrums. And in this way, it is somewhat of a chameleon because it can pair really well with different foods. We're going to see how well it pairs with cheese. But on its own, too, it can be this kind of like punk rock wine that's a little bit more sophisticated, though, too. It has all of these notes at its disposal. A question for you is, how do you like this? Is this one of your first experiences with Chenin Blanc? Or have you had many? Think about also, like, sometimes when you smell this wine, it might trick you. It might you might think it's sweet. You might think it's like there might be some sugar in here. There's no sugar in here. This is simply the grape doing what it does best. And what it does best is it gives you all of these exotic notes, and then it reins it in on the palate and kind of makes a very precise expression of a white French wine. Also, when you're tasting this wine, notice how long the finish lasts. The finish for any wine, especially white wines, is one of the most important parts because it gets your cheeks puckering. It gets you motivated for the next sip. It gets you interested in the next sip. And a wine without acidity is oftentimes a pretty boring or bland wine. It's a wine that your palate gets tired of pretty fast. And it's also one that rarely is there going to be a food type that pairs with it or complements it well. So this wine tends to have a fair amount of acidity, and so your cheeks pucker, you salivate a little bit. Those are telltale signs that this wine is made for food. But what I like about this wine too is that it does really well on its own. So if you're kind of getting into the cheese already, what you're going to start with is the Whitney cheese, and there's little kind of labels on each of them. So Whitney cheese is going to be the first one. This one looks a little bit more like your Alpine cheese. And if you can't see your labels for whatever reason, the Camembert, so the other cheese, kind of looks more like Brie. We'll obviously get into those when Will comes on, but if you need to snack already, start with the Whitney. That's the best way. Let me show you an example of kind of like the Loire up close. I see Todd has a question, so I'll get to that too. When you look at the Loire Valley from afar, if you've never visited, it is one of these beautiful kind of vacation-esque places. In fact, much of royalty used to visit the Loire Valley for their kind of annual trips, their summer trips. And so you have a lot of these castles that are adjacent to vineyards, all of which are on the river. So the river here is really important because it helps regulate the temperatures, it helps regulate the coolness, because I think you could almost imagine with a grape like this Chenin Blanc, if it got too ripe, if these sugar levels got too high, you might have a real problem with too much fruitiness. You might not have this kind of counterbalance of minerality. So because of the perfect kind of conditions here that naturally occur, and with this river really helping cool down some of these temperatures, especially when it gets warm around it, you have a natural environment that treats it really well. Has anyone been to the Loire? I'm interested if you have. Put it in the chat. Another thing about another factor about this wine that makes it kind of like shine above the rest is how they treat their vines. And so a big thing in the world right now, everywhere in the world, not just in France, is farming. How do you farm correctly in the vineyard to combat some of the rising temperatures, to combat some of the severe weather, either storms, calamities, or just things that you can't predict? How do you protect yourself against that? Because this is a financial institution, a winery is. I mean, if it's successful, it is. And you want to keep that going as much as you can. In the old world, where we are, Europe at large is really the old world, you don't have irrigation at hand. You don't have a lot of systems to help you protect. So if you're in a drought, you're in trouble. On the other side of that, if you have too much rain, you're also in trouble. You might have a dilute crop. You might have problems with harvesting to get those at the optimal ripeness. So what a lot of producers do, a lot of forward-thinking producers do, is plant crops in between the rows. So when you see a picture like this, with kind of all this beautiful, lush greenery in between the rows, this means that they are taking the measures to combat some of these things that they just can't control. When they do that, it's at least found from tasting wines especially that the wines tend to taste a lot better. They also tend to taste a lot more like their terroir, a lot more like where they come from than if they didn't do this. Than if they just kind of used fertilizers or used a little bit more commercial, easier, at least manually easier manner. This is really intense. This is really difficult. You take a lot of risks when you're trying to experiment, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. But when you do find that kind of biodiversity, that kind of perfect equilibrium, that's when you start making phenomenal wine. And Champollion has been around for nearly, I guess, 40, 45 years, and they've always been at the top. They're one of the first to be at the top. Let me take a break right there, and I'll look at the questions. Always make sure that you're smelling these wines. A big thing when I used to be a wine director in a restaurant called Charlie Bird in New York City. And so I've spent many hours on the floor. But I would find that a lot of people don't take the time to smell the wine. They kind of like dive right in, which is totally fine and fair. But when you're smelling the wine, and just like when you're smelling the cheese, that's kind of where the experience happens. If you don't spend time with that, you kind of miss a large portion of what's going on. The olfactory experience is really helpful to kind of understand the nuance, the subtleties. So take a minute to sniff it if you haven't already, because there's so much that happens on this nose and it's so aromatic. Todd has a great question comment. He said he often buys Chenin Blanc from Beringer in Napa. Are California Chenin Blanc grapes comparable to the ones in the Loire? In many ways, I find you can find some excellent, well, I guess there's two places, some excellent iterations of Chenin Blanc come from California, and they also come from South Africa. These are the other places that you should be looking. So 3 places in general. Loire is oftentimes like, this is the reference point, this is the benchmark. In California, you're obviously going to have a juicier, a little bit more ripe, a little bit more rambunctious expression of Chenin Blanc, simply because the sun shines so many days of the year, and the temperatures are often warmer. South Africa, you're going to have a similar expression, a little bit more rich. The style there is New World in both Napa and South Africa, so you're likely going to have a little bit more of that oak or that vanilla as an undertone, but you're going to have lovely expressions. And often, if they're made well, you're going to have that nice base of acidity that cuts through everything. So these are both great places to go. A lot of people actually have visited here via the comments. This is a great question. Nick is asking, because the vineyards are so close to the road, are there measurable effects of car exhaust on the grapes? Absolutely. But is anyone measuring them? Probably not. Probably purposely not. But surely, in a heavily populated area, you're going to have pollution that likely will affect some of that. If you want to take Burgundy as an example, the Grand Cru, and oftentimes the most coveted vineyards or parcels of vineyards, the ones that cost thousands upon thousands of dollars a bottle, those are higher on the hillside. So those are not where cars are anywhere near, and where we can walk, at least kind of as pedestrians walking through, and where cars can drive through, that's kind of more the flatland. And even on the other side of that is more of where the commercial things are happening. So those wines are normally the Village or Bourgogne, so a little bit cheaper, a little bit more entry level. Are they looking at kind of pollution to dictate that? No. But how, how it lies and what they're protecting, it gives you a good idea of what's going on. Should we be worried about that? Likely not, simply because a lot of what farmers are doing, a lot of this biodiversity is very much combating some of those effects. And so you have still a healthy environment, even if you were in a massively kind of metropolitan vineyard area. To be clear though, a lot of these places don't have a ton of traffic near them. They might have like some more tourist spots or wineries that might just be on the outskirts to welcome people in, but the ones that are really pumping out wine are often a little bit off the beaten path. Great question. I think this wine is drinking splendidly today. Also know that white wines can generally last 10, 15 years, especially a Chenin Blanc like this. So while this wine is really nice, if you were to sit on this for 5 more years, you would find a really nice spot that it would be in. It would start shedding some of its overt fruit, and then it would start getting more into those tones of earth, maybe just kind of a hint of kind of like earthy mushroom in the background, but in a great way. That might not sound great as I'm saying it, but in a great and alluring way. When the more you have with these kind of earthy elements mixed with the fruit, the more complexity you have. The more subtlety, the more nuance, the more possibility that different things are happening at once. And the more things happen in this simultaneous way, the more the wine becomes exciting. So white wines can stand the test of time, just like reds. Let's kind of slowly move into that red. And we can, of course, go back and forth. We will go back and forth when we get to the cheese. I just want to give you a primer for both of these wines before we dig into cheese knowledge. The next wine is going to be a Chianti. So we're moving countries. As you pour that, we have another question. Viticultural durable mean on the bottle? That's a great question. My guess is that is a translation, not necessarily error, because that's probably what it translates to. But I think it's lost in translation. Viticultural durable would likely mean something like sustainable farming. So my guess is that that's what they're trying to translate it to, because you'll see sustainable farming right next to it. You'll see things like this on the bottle that are kind of meant to help consumers, and that is one that does not help consumers. When this is from Kathleen, when having wine with cheese, is it best to cleanse your palate with wine before tasting the cheese, or follow the cheese with the wine? Sorry, this is from John, but on Kathleen's. I don't know. I would say probably cleanse your palate with wine first in between tasting cheese. Seems like a good call. Either way, all these tastes are going to kind of start mingling with one another. What's really exciting about this adventure tonight is that one wine's going to taste one way without cheese. One wine's going to taste a completely different way with a specific cheese. And then it will flip once again once you try it with yet another cheese. And so this just shows you how much cheese and how much food can really affect wine, can affect the experience. And this is why we get so excited about doing this, because each one will fundamentally change not only the flavors, but seemingly like the actual palate, like what is going on with the structure of the wine. This is as Greg asked this question, I'm going to bring up the Tuscany map. Are all Chiantis red blends? Yes and no. Great question. When we go to Italy, and I'll just show a brief map of Italy, which is a very colorful map. We are, of course, sort of near Florence or Firenze in Tuscany. This is where all of the Sangiovese is going to come from, nearly all of it. Certainly the most important Sangiovese coming from Chianti Classico, coming from places like Montalcino, where Brunello's made. All Super Tuscans are made, of course, in Tuscany too. So this area is where we're going to focus on. But all Chiantis are going to be red if they say Chianti. However, some do still blend with white wine grapes. So while the wine is definitely red, there can be a little bit of white in there, generally with Trebbiano or other lesser known grapes. In fact, this is a big point of contention. So a lot of the producers back in the day, this is the 70s, a lot of the producers decided to go out on their own because the government decided to make it a law that you had to blend your Chianti, had to, with these white wine grapes also. And governments have a lot of control, especially in the old world, when it comes to wine. And so if you misstep or overstep, you can get in some real trouble. They can shut down not only your winery, but they can make sure you're not labeling how you'd like to label. That is to say, if you're making money off your recognizable Chianti Classico label, but you're not following the rules, then they could shut you down and say, no, 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 you're not labeling like this anymore. You need to label your wine table wine because you're not adhering to our standards. So this was a big fight. And so some of the producers, the producer we're drinking, first and foremost, was leading the pack, Felsina. Felsina decided to say, no, we think 100% Sangiovese all day, all night. We think this grape is a world-class grape, and it should not be adulterated by white wine grapes and or other grapes that we don't feel like blending with it because we think it's becoming a lesser wine. So as they started battling back and forth, they eventually won. However, it had already gone too far, so producers started bottling their own wines under table wine because they weren't following the laws. They didn't want to. So a Super Tuscan movement came out of this simply because they started making these kind of fantasy names for their bottles, and they weren't adhering to any laws. They were actually table wine. When you look at Sassicaia, that's not adhering to any strict laws. It has a mix of Cabernet in there that for a long time was castigated as a grape that belongs anywhere near Tuscany. And so these Super Tuscan wines were, or at least began, as a resistance movement. And some of the best producers, Felsina, Fontoti is another one. There's probably 5 or 10 that you can find. Some of the best producers actively tried to resist that, and many of them have stuck to their roots. And so while all Chianti does not have to be 100% Sangiovese, it can be blended. Some of the best oftentimes is. And our example is 100% Sangiovese. That's kind of a traditional way of making it, and producers like it simply because it can offer such a pure, pristine, ruby, vibrant, and fresh expression of the grape. So when you smell this, you get almost exactly that description. You get all this black cherry that kind of runs, like immediately pops out with a little bit of like these green notes, but it smells so inviting, a little bit floral. I mean, this wine honestly impresses me every single time I open it. I think it's the best. I actually think this might be the best value in wine today, simply because a lot of people don't think Chianti can compete with the rest of the world, and it actually can. A good thing about this map that's in front of you, one of the things I like about it most, is that it shows you just how much wine is made in and around Chianti. And this is an important fact, or this is an important observation at least. You'll see in the middle, this kind of darker maroon, I mean, it's darker than burgundy, but this spot in the middle, the heart of this map is Chianti Classico. You'll see Chiantis used in a lot of these neighboring places, the outskirts. That is not Chianti Classico. Chianti Classico is the first region that was qualified, and really the best region, that got its certification from the government and said, yes, this is what we think Sangiovese, this is what we think Chianti should taste like. It's all of this. Later, after the success of Chianti Classico was seen by all of these neighbors, everyone started putting in their papers and saying, well, we make pretty good Sangiovese too, as do we. And so Chianti became a little bit bigger. However, there's only one Chianti Classico. And you can see this when you take your bottle, you'll see this black rooster. This is what you want to look for. This means it is Chianti Classico. These other Chiantis that you see around it, some of them can be good, to be fair. You just need to be a little bit, you kind of have to be a bit more specific when you're picking it out. But when you have this label, it's almost always going to be a memorable bottle of Chianti because it's a Chianti Classico. This rooster will not exist in those other Chiantis. It is legally not allowed to. And so that's a trick when you're in a wine shop and you're looking for a wine similar to this. That's kind of like your stamp of approval. That's what you want to look for. It's going to help you every time. If it doesn't have that, you can still give it a try, but you kind of want to know that producer at that point. You want to know what you're getting into. A Chianti Classico, you can kind of grab blindly and have a pretty good idea of what that quality is going to be like. What does everyone think about this? I think it's always a little bit lighter than I'm guessing because, it's Tuscany. You think maybe a little bit more power, but watch how the tannins kind of sneak up on you in a pleasant way, in my opinion. The front part of this wine is pretty light and lithe and sleek, but then you have a little bit of that grippiness, that tannin, so it feels like your mouth's drying out a little bit. That's the body of the wine. It comes up and sneaks up at the end. That's a great sign, not only because that's telling us it's going to want food and it's going to do well with food. It's obviously going to do quite well with this cheese, but it's a nice kind of middle ground. You can absolutely have this wine on its own. You don't need a big juicy steak like you might need with Brunello. And Brunello's great. Brunello's also 100% Sangiovese, and it's made in Montalcino, this green area, so very close by. But because of its oak aging, it needs a long time. This wine is pretty much ready to go relatively immediately. Which Chianti is second place to Classico? This is good. The second place, always a good question. If I were to pick a second place, it gets a little bit tricky because it's not always second place, but you're going to look for what is closest to it, and you'll see the Colli Senesi is the closest. So Chianti Colli Senesi is the closest. This kind of pink, almost, like pink area. It borders Chianti Classico. So always look for bordering areas, always look for neighboring villages, wherever you are in the world. This is smart because obviously the terroir is going to be pretty similar. Like, if they are right next to each other, they share a border, at some point you're not really going to be able to tell which is which unless there's a large distance between them. So this would be the second, and this name is kind of in the right, if you can see my cursor, it's circling it. This would be the second place. To give you an idea of what these vineyards look like, I mean, it's kind of classic, beautiful, where you want a vacation. They are rolling hills. They're undulating hillsides with vineyards, generally facing the sun. That's where they want them to be. But they also have elevation here too. And that elevation really helps, especially when it gets hot. That heat can really dry out grapes. It can make grapes a little bit too sugary. It can get those flavors to be too robust. And so this elevation helps kind of calm it down. It helps make that acidity stay in place. Again, that's what's driving the wine. And so a lot of these top vineyards and a lot of places in Chianti Classico differ from the places around it because they have elevation. Generally somewhere from 300 to 420 meters is like the average. But this is absolutely beautiful area. And if you visit Italy, this is one place you should absolutely try and visit. These wineries are not hard to kind of drive up to, and it's very much worth your while. Any questions on this one? We're going to slowly get into cheese soon. So if it's not near you, make it near you. I'll buy you some time no matter what. I do love looking at cellar pictures of wineries. It's one of my favorite things to do. You'll see this is Felsina. You'll see that they do have a lot of wood in this winery. Wood is going to be found almost in any red wine area, a lot of barrels. It's kind of this kind of cave, a little bit dark, dank, but this is exactly what you want to see in a properly functioning winery, especially like an old world winery. But you'll also find a lot of these big barrels. These barrels are clearly larger than any human I've met. And they have to be in these kind of very large cellar rooms. And they're often also about 30, 40, sometimes 50-year-old barrels. They'll just replace what they need to replace and then leave it there, simply because you can imagine the task of moving one of these, even when it's empty. But this is how a lot of these wines age in especially the heart of Italy, but a lot of places in Italy use a similar method. And this is what makes a difference between Italian wine and French wine. No real French wine that I can at least name off the top of my head, and as a not being an exception, uses this sort of cuve is what you call it, this sort of massive barrel like Italy does. And so when you use a barrel like this, you have a different oxygen exchange. And so the wines taste different. They taste a little bit more rustic. They don't taste quite as fresh as like that kind of perfect Pinot from Burgundy. And this is one reason why I love Italy, because they have more of that rustic feel to them, because they're made in this very traditional old school way. And sometimes modernity really blends into that winemaking process for sure. But at its core, much of Italian wine is built on the principle of these kind of massive barrels and letting the wine do what it wants to do. And often it comes out in this really kind of beautiful way that nowhere else in the world really tastes like. These wines don't taste like California wines. They don't taste like French wines. They don't taste like Greek wines. They very much are their own. And this is one reason why. All right. I know I kept you, and specifically Will, in suspense there. Will, nice to have you on. Will and I have worked on and off together for what? Since like 2020, right? Around
2020.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why I guess we started working together in the beginning was when I was looking for ways of mixing cheese with wine or introducing cheese with wine. I did a lot of research on my own. I tasted just about every single place you could think of, at least in New York City and Brooklyn, that thought itself to be a proper cheesemonger. And some of them were pretty good. Some of them were nowhere near what I expected them to be, but Saxelby's always came on top every single time. And so I was sort of astonished. I eventually reached out and we forged a sort of relationship. I think these cheeses, and you out there are allowed to disagree with me if you like. I think these cheeses are the best you can find on the market, in my opinion. I'll let Will kind of talk about Saxelby's a little bit before we dive into it. But I also like this idea that they all come from America, or North America at least. And even if they kind of mimic other places in the world, they are sort of nearby all of us. So there is this beauty of old world meets new world in these cheeses too. But Will, give us a little background of Saxelby's, and then let's dig into the cheeses. We're going to start with the Whitney, if that's cool with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I work for a very small and unique company that was founded in 2006. And the express purpose of that company is to market and distribute exclusively American cheeses. And specifically within that universe, we work with farmstead producers, especially. And farmstead producers, farmstead is a technical term in the cheesemaking world, and farmstead means that you both have the animals and you are making the cheese. That is an extraordinary amount of work. Both of those two sides of that coin are more than full-time jobs. So in stable situations, what you frequently see is two families, where actually one family owns one part of it, the other family owns the other part of it, or a husband and wife team, and they'll divide it up between the two teams. But those are the producers where, because they have total control over the process, they're able to best really get very specific about creating something that's really particular, and they're able to have absolutely fanatical control over quality. So those are the producers. Go ahead.
To stop you real quick, and just so
Of course.
everyone knows, what Will just presented is kind of exactly how small wineries work. You have one person in the cellar, one person in the vineyard, whomever it is. Sometimes it's brothers, sometimes it's family members, sometimes it's, father or mother in the cellar, daughter or son in the vineyard, but this is exactly how it works. So they're mimicking one another in this way.
That's absolutely true, and they're mimicking each other because in both cases. So going back to that for a second, yeah. So um, in the one instance, you're producing the thing that you're going to ferment and then age, and that thing that you are looking to ferment and then age, whether it's grapes or it's milk, either way, what you're looking to do is to have really rich biodiversity as the basic source. So everything that Brandon was just talking about having um, other plants and great biodiversity going on in the vineyard, and that contributing to complexity in the flavor of the grapes. That's 100%. I was nodding vigorously off camera. That is 100% correct for the way that we think about dairy farming, where you want that field or that pasture to have flowers in it. You want it to have really complex, lots of different. You want that to be a complex ecosystem. You want there to be birds. You want there to be a lot going on there, because that's going to lead to complex macromolecules in the milk. And those macromolecules, whether they're in the grapes or they're in the milk, are then going to be able to break down. As they break down, so originally when they're these macromolecules, they're actually too big to taste. Like it's like a huge brick trying to fit into a small hole. They're too big to taste. So when you break them down through the process of fermentation and aging, they then become things that you can actually taste. And that's where we get really excited, because if you do the work on this end of things, and then you will end up being able to create something that's really beautiful on the far end. But doing this work over here takes a long time and is frequently labor intensive, and the connection between these two things is not always clear. And so that's one of the things that really separates people who have the expertise in terms of either winemaking or cheesemaking or whatever, and who are willing to take on projects that are very long-term projects. I mean, these can be 5-year, 10-year, really turning around a farm, which actually we're about to talk about with one of these cheeses, can take 15 years, 20 years, 25. I mean, it's a very long, layered and nuanced process that you really have to kind of be husbanding long. So I just want to highlight a couple things real quick that Brandon said that are absolutely important, and I think you should hear this from another food and beverage person as well. So Loire Valley wines, gorgeous wines, always a great value. Drink them whenever you can. They're super food friendly. If you ask Brandon, here's a 5-course dinner and I want to do only Loire Valley wines the whole way through, it would be, that would be an extremely easy thing to sketch out. Loire Valley wines are a frequent kind of back pocket favorite of restaurant sommeliers to really blow your mind with something you might not have actually heard of, but is going to be just an absolutely lovely food wine. Over and beyond that, I actually used to sell this Chianti 10 years ago. It's gorgeous. I love it. It is a terrific value. So yes, that's delightful.
Let's do pairing with Shannon and Whitney first, and kind of watch how that kind of manifests, so everyone kind of knows what page we're on. And I think the best way to do this is, at least for the people who are tasting, is to kind of like take a sip first, and don't like have wine in your mouth while you're trying to eat cheese, because that's a hazard for everyone. But take a sip first and then dig into the cheese. And then you'll kind of see how they go together. You can, of course, mix and match. But let's start with the Shannon and Whitney.
So with Whitney, one of the things that you're looking for there is that, so Whitney is a Gruyere style cheese that is made in northern Vermont. When you're looking at it, you're going to see that it's got a yellowy paste. That yellowy paste is telling you this is a cow's milk cheese. It's got a very elastic, lush texture to it. And that elasticity that elasticity is going to be really important, because that acidity that's coming through on that white wine, you've got, in both cases here, you've got really, really rich cheeses that are just very full and lush, and they're going to show off and make that wine look really crisp and really bright. And this is what we're looking for here. So the acidic and mineral components in wine can kind of do like the rhythm section in a band. So they can support everything else that's going on and kind of give pacing to it. So they're there to let that soaring vocal of that big aromatic note happen, and then clean it up and crisp it, and then you're ready for the next note. So somebody had asked earlier, should I do cheese and wine or wine and cheese? The answer is you should be doing everything. You should be doing wine, cheese, wine. You should be doing wine, wine, cheese, cheese. Do everything, because the way in which that's going to be sort of building up on your palate, well, you have several bites of cheese and you'll notice this is starting to get a little bit salty. And then you'll taste it, have a little bit of that wine, and it'll wash all that salt right away. So that way in which they are going to complement each other is something that you should absolutely be looking to kind of see in contrast, and also see how they develop, because these are wines that are both really food friendly wines. And part of that means on the wine basis that they actually love to have food with them. They want to partner. You could definitely sit down and have a glass of either of these wines, but they are somewhat tart, or in the case of the Chianti, there's that slight drying feature. And so having that richer cheese to kind of smooth that out is a really lovely thing.
I like how the fruit, and hopefully everyone can taste this too. I like how the fruit really melds well with the cheese, especially the Whitney to begin with. That fruity nature kind of like understands some of that kind of earthiness in a really exciting and interesting way. The compliments there. The Chenin Blanc also tends to have a little bit more mouthfeel, a little bit more tannin than, say, like if we brought Chablis to the table. Chablis likely couldn't pair quite as well with this cheese, simply because you always want to think of these wines in terms of, are they kind of lighter bodied, middle, or heavier bodied? And Chenin Blanc tends to go middle, sometimes middle heavy, and it can pick up a lot of that fat because it naturally is going to have some of that mouthfeel. And so it's really cool to see that happen. But everyone can try the other cheese as well if you like. How about rind? Rind is always a fun question for me, and I feel like I have enough cheese knowledge to be able to, like, yeah, you can eat that rind. For this one, I wouldn't, for the Whitney, but I hope you're going to prove me wrong. For the Camembert, of course, I'd eat the rind. But can you talk a little bit about like edible rind, and like when that's a smart move and when to avoid it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are inedible rinds. So the rind is made out of bark, it's made out of wax, it's made out of some other material that you shouldn't be eating, at all. So setting those aside for a moment. For everything else where you're looking at it and you're like, this looks like a cheese rind, that is something you can eat. Whether you try, entirely a question for you. I think that is something where it's always worth tasting it. Whether you choose to be eating as much of it as comes with the cheese, again, totally up to you. There are frequently, and this is especially true for Whitney, you should really smell that rind. Get that rind up to your nose and really smell it, because there are flavors. The rind is the cheese. It's just been dried out and compressed into its own kind of substance that then protects the outside of the cheese. So you'll notice that there are flavors there. So for instance, with Whitney, you'll notice flavors that are going to be more animally. Think about sometimes you get kind of like, if you get into a car with leather seats on a hot day, like that smell of leather. You'll notice flavors and aromas that are there on the rind. And then as you go back and eat the cheese, you'll notice that they're there, but they're just much, much, much more in the background. They're much more quieter kind of background note flavors. So smelling the rind and tasting the rind is a great way to educate yourself about the cheese and kind of figure out what's going on.
Cool. We have two comments. One is, when we get to the Camembert, is seriously the best cheese Pierce and Don have ever eaten. Debbie, I'm interested in the migraines. Do you get migraines from cheese? Is that what you mean? I'll give you a second to let us know what that is. The Whitney rind, Leslie's saying the Whitney rind tastes like mushrooms, more apparent with the Chianti. Yeah, I bet these
Absolutely.
rinds do taste differently with each wine. It's kind of cool to see how different the wines start tasting. I would say that everyone, if you've already done the Chenin Blanc and the Whitney, start doing the Chenin Blanc and the Camembert. See how they integrate, see what happens with them, see the differences. Oh, good. It's not you, Debbie. I was worried that you have an oncoming migraine. But Will, have you heard of migraines and cheese? I assume it's a dairy thing, if anything, like a crazy dairy thing.
Um, I will confess I've not heard about migraines and cheese. It would not surprise me insofar as cheese is chemically really complex. And um, in my experience, when people who I know have started developing migraines in response to food, I mean, more in response to wine, really. But that's typically an issue where they're really stressed out, and um, there's something about uh, there's something that their body is kind of responding to things that are weird. So more
Same
with wine.
same with wine. In many ways, a lot of people think like sulfur is gonna make migraines happen or migraines worse. Sulfur is gonna give the headache. Oftentimes, at least science says this. So who knows? You know, I think everybody's different, and so some people might be hyperallergic to sulfur. But sulfur also naturally occurs in so many grocery products that we just don't talk about it for whatever reason. We talk a lot about it in wine, specifically because a lot of producers will add a very, very tiny amount, if it's a good producer, a very tiny amount of sulfur to preserve the wine. A lot of producers are actually backing off how much sulfur they use. So generally, if you have sulfur problems, it might not really, it would be hard. I'd be hard pressed if we're drinking, you know, like wines like this to see what sulfur is happening in here that's going to create that issue. So it's probably more like a confluence of events that's occurring. Whether like if they're doing a supernatural way, so there's a little bit more Brett in there, at least for the wine. So that means like kind of like natural funk, natural bacteria might be accumulating simply because the wine process, because of how the people view the wine. It could be a few different things. Um, can you talk a little bit about the farm that Whitney comes from?
Yeah. So Whitney is made by Jasper Hill. Jasper Hill is a farm that is in northeastern Vermont. It's in what is called the Northeast Kingdom, which until I visited there, I actually thought was a joke that was being played on me. But it's from the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont. It is a unique and very interesting place because they are sort of the biggest of the small producers. They are big enough where they have their own microbiologist, and they really are able to throw serious resources at fixing problems and identifying things and deciding that they want to do R&D. But they're also small enough where they get to do cool and nerdy stuff. One of the things that I was thinking about, Brandon, while you were talking is about how, you know, when you're making wine, you've got a learning curve, but it might take you a couple of years. If you have a wine that needs to age for a long time, it might take you a couple of years to really realize you have a problem. And cheese making has the same problem where if you have a cheese like this that might take about 4 or 5 months to age, you might not realize that, oh, you need to tweak some variable in that situation until 4 or 5 months down the road. And so every batch is your time between batches to correct things is 4 or 5 months, which means it's tough. So Whitney, on the other hand, this is actually a quite new cheese. They came up with this about a year and a half ago, and have been improving it ever since. And so it's a delicious cheese. It's lovely. It melts very well. The way in which it's elastic and you can bend it, you can twist it, that's telling you how well it melts. It's the same question of protein structure in both cases. So
Yeah,
um,
a grilled cheese with this would be pretty
stellar. Yeah.
excellent. Like, that should be on a Michelin menu. Also on this point, watch how your cheeses change, and many of you probably already know this. Your cheeses are changing with the temperature. And so if you just pulled them out of the fridge, you're always going to taste a cheese that you're like, oh, that tastes like, you know, cheese. And as they come to room temperature, or maybe just a little bit cooler than room temperature, that's when you see the cheese start showing off. The same thing happens with wine. When you pull out a freezing cold wine, especially if it's a white wine, you're like, cool, that kind of like tastes like white wine that I've had before. But as it warms up just a little bit, then you get to see some of its florality, some of the kind of underbelly of those subtleties and nuances. And that's what I'm seeing that too, because I mean I pulled these out at the right time, but now I'm even seeing this, especially with the Camembert, like how
Mm-hmm.
that's really blossoming into this
Mm-hmm.
wild. So let's start talking about the Camembert. Again, that's the kind of red wine pairing that we had in mind, though do whatever you want. But we're gonna move to the Camembert.
Yeah, so Nancy's Camembert. Nancy's Camembert is made in the Hudson Valley in New York. This is a mixed milk cheese, so this is both sheep's milk and cow's milk. Whitney is a cow's milk cheese. Um, there are three different animals that we mostly make cheese from. That's sheep, cow, and goat. They have very different milk chemistry. Sheep's milk is about twice as fatty and has about twice as much protein as cow's milk does. And so that's part of what is giving you this just ultra lush texture with this. Brandon had mentioned earlier, there are red wines where you think about reaching for a steak, but this is kind of getting into that vibe because you've got some animally undertones to it. You've got plenty of butter fat on the palate. So this is a really lovely kind of, to me, this is a berries and cream pairing. You get those cherry notes, you get all of these creamy complex notes on the cheese that are going to be very fatty. And so you get that kind of, the wine gets its dance partner that's looking for, it's kind of lean in some ways. It gets this very lush cheese to kind of help it open up. So mixed milk cheeses are something that we see often actually more with pre-industrial producers, where you might have had a farm and it was efficient to have a bunch of cows, but it was also helpful to have sheep or goats because sheep or goats tend to eat different things than cows do. So they tend to go for more woody things that are kind of at the edge of the forest, things that are right at the edge of the fence row, those kinds of areas where cows are picky and they don't want to eat it. And so the idea that you would have both of these animals and you might have, I don't know, call it 60-40 or 80-20 or something like that, you might have some perspective. And so you make a cheese that's going to be a mix. And that's actually, especially for Northern Italy, that's a very common thing to do, that you might be making a soft cheese that's going to mature relatively quickly. So this cheese is aging for about 30 days. It's a very quick turnaround for this kind of thing. And that's going to be a mixed milk cheese. And you really get to have kind of the best of all worlds, and you get to use everything you have, which as a dairy farmer is, of course, super important.
I'd like everyone who's near their keyboard to type in what they think the best pairing is. I'd love to see that in the chat if you're down for it. I have to say right now, what I just tasted, the Camembert and this Chianti are knockout. And I kind of thought going into this, I mean, if the cheeses aren't next to you every day, it's not the easiest thing. Once they are next to you and you just actively, try them every day, like then you can kind of start figuring things out. But in my mind, as like Chianti and Camembert should be on paper spectacular, should like no brainer. And I feel like that's coming to fruition right now. I like a lot of what you said with those animal savory tones. It really
Mm-hmm.
brings that out of the Chianti, because as we taste the Chianti by itself, those are harder to kind of comprehend, I think. You get more of that onslaught of kind of like that fresh cherry, almost berry-like, because it is a lighter wine. And those flavors are there if you search for them, but they're a little bit more kind of subdued. But when the cheese comes out, it really makes those flavors pop out. I think the same thing would happen if you had Chenin Blanc and like foie gras or something to this effect. You'd start seeing the savory side of Chenin Blanc, or a sweet wine, which is normally, like a sweet Chenin Blanc or something like this. You'd start seeing the savory part of that sweetness. And I think that goes together so well here. But I'm sure the Camembert and the Chenin Blanc do pretty well too. I mean, this is the madness of cheese and wine. And this is what, I mean, this is why you should have cheese and wine. But again, it's good cheese. Like this cheese is so complicated when it is like a glass of wine. You keep coming back to the same cheese and noticing something different. You might have a piece without rind, you might have a piece with rind. You kind of, it's this evolution. Uh, do you have a favorite of those, Will? I assume you're kind of the Chianti Camembert guy.
Um, Actually, no. I'm on the other side of it. Whitney cheeses that are like Whitney, they're the Gruyere style cheese that have um that the way in which that texture is luscious, but the way in which also that texture is sort of lean. Lovely. I can eat pounds of that. I can do that all day long. So that and then a white wine that's just really crisp and really clean to cut in with that. To me that's it. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I think it's been really fun when we can have these pairings where everybody gets to kind of, the pairings get to trade dance partners. Everybody actually gets along, And so it is really lovely to see how each of these things kind of open up and reveal different things about each other. Um,
When
um,
I think a good rule to follow for everyone out there who wants to replicate this experience is always, if you're starting from scratch and you don't really know which way to go, always go with things that grow next to each other, or at least as close as you can. So if you have an Italian inspired night, you have Italian wine on the side or something, then don't be afraid to grab that Italian cheese and watch what happens there. Same thing with anywhere else, France, all of that stuff. Obviously, we are kind of getting into the geeky side of things, so we kind of know where things are going here. But by and large, if you have a red wine, you're going to want something that has a little bit more weight to it. Oftentimes, that generally I find like a creaminess has something to do with that too. But you want to be using that language when you're talking to someone as you're buying these things at a grocery shop or a cheese shop, wine shop, wherever you are. I want a wine or I want a cheese that can pair something with a little bit heavier, a little bit more body. That's a great descriptor to help get exactly what you want. And the other side of that is with a white wine, I have a white wine that's a little bit more crisp and fresh. And I want a cheese that might be able to maneuver that without overtaking it. And so just having the language to find what direction you want to go is really more than half the battle, in my opinion. Do you have any tips for that too, Will, as we kind of end
yeah,
this out?
absolutely. I would say cheese is a uh, the wine world is such its own space, but the cheese world is something where uh, not to sound like I'm trying to get excited about what I do, but finding a really good retailer makes a huge difference. If cheese is stored poorly, if it sits in plastic for too long, anything like that, it's really terrible for the cheese. Cheese needs to breathe. It shouldn't be in plastic for a long time. And so ideally, if you can, you want to get something where you want to go somewhere where they're going to be cutting it for you. And you know that piece that you're getting is something that's a fresh piece that's going to make a huge difference for you. And so you could spend a lot of money on something, but if it's wrapped in plastic for too long, it's going to lose a lot of its character. And it's going to pick up other flavors that are unpleasant. So it's very important to be going to a really good retailer who's got good volume, who cares for the product, and who can answer questions. If they can't answer questions about the product, you really shouldn't be, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Same goes with wine. All right. I want to respect the hour as always. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us. I mean, these cheeses, again, they always inspire me to go out and eat more cheese and have more wine, ideally with it. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back over to Jerry. Thank you, Jerry, for having us, and Brooke. And thanks once again to Kelly for helping put this together. This is a massive undertaking, but I hope you enjoyed the wine and the cheese.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brendan and Will. Wow, that was amazing. As usual, we really learned a lot and your presentation was excellent. And thank you to our wonderful clients for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed spending this time with you and will continue to remain focused every day on reaching your goals. Also, thank you for introducing us to so many of your friends and family. Please feel free to use this as a resource for anything they may need. We have loved working with them and promise to also give them an amazing experience. We have a great calendar of special client events planned for you and hope you can join us for many of those as well. Good night, everyone, and we look forward to talking with you soon.